A real crime. In a series of podcasts, I want you to travel down some lonely roads with me. These are the roads I traveled with families who never got to say goodbye to loved ones. These family members were fated to live the rest of their lives waiting and wondering. I will begin this series with unsolved murders, but I will also revisit cases that include arrests because aspects of the case are worth re-examining. I wrote these stories when I worked as a reporter for the Charleston Gazette. Thanks for joining me today. When I started this podcast, I explained that I would work with stories I covered when I was a reporter for the Charleston Gazette. I wrote about Hank Williams several times. To clarify, I am not saying there was anything nefarious about his death, but I want you to see what system we once used to declare him and others dead. Episode 33, Hank Williams. If there is a real crime in this story, it is that someone so talented died so young. Hank Williams was only 29 when he was declared dead in the Oak Hill Hospital, January the 1st, 1953. Thankfully, the system used at the time to declare Williams dead is long gone. I believe people could have gotten away with murder in the old system. But before I explain further, let's look at the man some have called the Hillbilly Shakespeare. During his life, his music touched so many people, and even in death, his influence continues today. The many musicians who cite him as an influence include Elvis Presley, Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, Willie Nelson, and the Rolling Stones. In 2010, members of the Pulitzer Prize Committee issued a special citation for Williams for his craftsmanship as a songwriter who expressed universal feelings with poignant simplicity and played a pivotal role in transforming country music into a major musical and cultural force in American life. Universal feelings with poignant simplicity. That is exactly what comes through in such songs as I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. Heartbreak and honesty pour out of his songs. I live near the Kanawha River. From my bed at night, I hear a train heading east. The track it travels was laid out between the mountain and the river. The train's lonesome whistle blows and the sound rumbles on rails and ribs. As everyone knows, Hank, who lived in Alabama, was to perform in Charleston, West Virginia on December 31st, 1953. An ice storm in Nashville prevented him from flying. The delays were making it impossible for him to meet his scheduled time in Charleston. He decided to head to Canton, Ohio for a New Year's Eve concert. I was fortunate to be able to interview Charles Carr, the young man who drove Hank on this trip. His father and Hank were good friends. When Hank needed to make the trip, Carr told Hank that his then 17-year-old son could drive Hank's new baby blue Cadillac. Everyone knows that Carr stopped at the Skyline Drive-In outside of Oak Hill for a break. Hank was in the back seat under a blanket and a coat. After his break, Carr noticed the coverings on Hank had come off. Suffering with terrible back pain, Hank had stretched out in the back seat of his famous Cadillac for the trip. Hank also suffered with spina bifida, and like Elvis, Hank suffered from a bad doctor's prescriptions. Carr was told there was a hospital in Oak Hill. He drove into town and pulled into the Pure Oil station on Main Street. He asked for directions to the nearby hospital. The main section of Oak Hill Hospital is still there and in the same location, but it has been expanded and is now called Plateau Medical Center. Hank was carried into the hospital. In one of several stories I wrote about Hank, I interviewed some men who served on the 6-member coroner's jury for Hank. One of them, the late Charlie Miller, said the 6 men who served on the jury were selected by an incredibly unscientific method. Miller, who was half of Steen Miller Incorporated, an automobile dealership in Oak Hill, said they were businessmen who were recruited during their lunch hour. The 6 were white men. West Virginia leaders did not allow women to serve on juries until 1957, so you can well imagine they did not think it was women's work to look at dead bodies. Miller went on to tell me that at Oak Hill Hospital, Dr. Diego Neri pulled the sheet back from Hank. Miller said that in effect, the 6 of them said, "Yes, he's dead." Miller also told me that obviously the 6 businessmen had no medical training and just by sight agreed the person before them was in fact dead. Hank was not murdered. He died from a combination of health problems. But I want to bring this to your attention to think about how easily it would have been under that system to get away with murder. I can imagine dozens of ways people could have been murdered with little chance that a coroner's jury would figure it out. One spouse could beat or strangle the other to death. Then the surviving spouse could throw the body in the pond on the family farm. After someone spotted the body, it would be easy to say that the victim must have drowned. There would have been no one to say there was no water in the lungs. Mercifully today, we have a well-thought-out medical examiner system. West Virginia's first chief medical examiner was Dr. Irvin Sofer. When he spoke to juries, he had an excellent ability to reduce complexities to easily understandable points. After he took the stand, I often heard him tell jurors that if a body was found on the ground outside an open window, a medical examiner had to determine if the person jumped, was pushed, or fell out accidentally. I have great confidence in the team of people who work for the state medical examiner's office today. It would be extremely difficult to fool someone in our current system. After Williams's body left the hospital, he came under the care of Joe Tyree at his funeral home. Tyree took care of all the arrangements that Hank's mother wanted, and he helped to drive the body in a hearse to Alabama. Tyree also gave a room in his former funeral home, then across from the hospital, to Hank's driver, Charles Carr, while Carr waited to return home. Tyree told me he frequently got calls, especially around New Year's, from people asking him about Williams. Tyree, who was 94 when he died 2 years ago, was always gracious in answering the many calls. The late Howard Janey was an Oak Hill police officer at the time Hank died. He was also generous in sharing his memories with me and other writers. I grew up knowing the police, the mortician, the doctor, and several members of the coroner's jury. This closeness to real people always helped me to identify with this sad story. Various fans of Hank Williams tried over the years to expand on tributes to him in Oak Hill. After a New Jersey woman with an amazing collection of Williams artifacts moved into Oak Hill, several people tried to press forward on the idea of a Hank Williams Museum in Oak Hill. For several years, they planned to house her collection in the former Pure Oil station. This is the station Carr pulled into to get directions to the hospital while Hank was still in the backseat of the Cadillac. But it is a real crime that those plans fell apart. In 2006, the station was bulldozed. Marianne Sharif has since died, and only part of her collection survived her. Members of the public can see some of the items in her collection at the Lewis House, also on Main Street. There's a memorial plaque to Hank Williams in front of the Oak Hill Public Library. I wish there could be more. Hank sang that he would never get out of life alive. None of us can. But he left us with his words and music to help us along the way. Movies, books, videos keep rolling out because this 29-year-old genius captured our hearts and minds. In Alan Jackson's video that accompanies his song Midnight in Montgomery, he imagines Hank visiting his gravesite. A line from the song has Hank saying, "It's nice to know you care." We care. You still make us cry. You still touch hearts you never knew. Thanks to you for listening, to Tommy Siner for his always great work, and to Brenda Pinnell for her technical skills. Please join me next Wednesday for a new episode of A Real Crime with Susan Williams.